Welcome back to Practice Underwater. And before we even get into the interview, I just want to say that I think there's been something really fun that's happened with Practice Underwater where, our audience seems to really be grabbing onto the segment again. It's just such a popular one. And, there's definitely different types of guests on Practice Underwater. And I think that Bob in particular, who, if you haven't listened to part one, I'd highly recommend you go back and listen to part one. But we're here with Bob. And if you haven't listened to part one, I'm just going to kind of briefly describe Bob's situation. So Bob is on the older side of dentists in the shared practices community. And, Bob ended up 10 years ago opening up a location after being in the Air Force for 3 years and an associate for 3 years. So kind of in year 13 of his career, he opened up a location and started as a 6-op practice and got it to about 2 million. And then over COVID, Bob found shared practices, and shared practices talked about how you can invest in growth and, kind of put some staff costs there where they might be a little bit not justified at the moment, and get to the point where you're really growing. And Bob has done that. And so from 2 million in 2020 to now this year, Bob is going to do about 7.75, almost 8 million between two offices that are like one big office. So you got to listen to the last episode if you want more details on that. We spent a while talking about it. And, Bob is really coming in asking the question. We had some discussions around Bob's profitability. Bob thought his profitability wasn't healthy. I looked at it and I saw that it actually was more healthy than not. Definitely some room for improvement, but nothing that I would think is like an emergency. And so we've had that conversation, and kind of Bob is at this fork in the road where it's like, do I add more locations or do I maybe optimize what I currently have? And Bob made a comment at the very end that is where I want to start today, where Bob talked about how growth has been one of those things that has been very taxing emotionally, physically, financially. And so, that's where there's some hesitation around growth. And so I actually want to start there and get that kind of in place and have that discussion and then go from there. So, Bob, welcome back. And, thanks for joining us again on the Shared Practices podcast.
Thank you, George. It's great to be here.
So maybe kind of for our listeners, help us understand, I want to understand what has been taxing about growth to date.
So, growth to date, the taxing has been a combination of different things. One, we alluded to in the last episode, financially, there are times when the balance sheet isn't looking that great. And when the balance sheet isn't looking that great, then I am not getting paid as much as what I'm contributing. And so that's the financial stress that happens. I feel like we have that. We're in a good place now, but there were months, probably 18 months that were very, very lean that I did not pay myself. And so over the course of the last, say, 18 months, 2 years, I've been making up for that. But that stressor, still is one that I don't want to relive. It was my own doing. Like I said, I was definitely wrapped up in the growth of the practice and wanted to keep that going. And so the easiest way to do that would be to just keep hiring people, keep opening spots to get new patients in, expanding the practice, etc. Other things is, like I said, I have a good team, so the team handles most of everything. But clinically, if I lose an associate or something like that happens, that falls on me, and that can put me back in the chair 5 days a week, and that could be a stressor. And so I feel like in the past, I haven't done a good job of creating boundaries. And I feel like going forward, I'd like to create some boundaries. And those boundaries would be something that I would operate in that would give me what I'm looking for out of practice ownership clinically, and then also from a work life balance as well. And we can talk about what some of those boundaries might be.
Yeah. So boundaries are great. Totally. And I want to start with the financial piece and then I want to
Sure.
go to the boundaries. So help me understand the cash flow financial pick. Like, where's the strain right now? Where's the pain point?
We're in a really good spot right now. After we purchased a second practice. The cash flow's been great as far as that goes. So still, our balance sheet needs a little bit of work. I mean, our profit and loss needs a little bit of work, but overall, I feel like we're in a good place. Most of the financial stress I'm talking about was historical and going back to previous times.
So this calendar year, can you walk us through how you pay yourself?
Basically, I pay myself just like I would pay an associate, a certain percentage of what I collect.
And then do you take additional money out of the practice outside of that?
I usually reinvest everything back into the practice.
And is that sustainable?
No, that would probably be something I would create a boundary with as well.
Yeah, so maybe help me understand, like, what is the like if like so I guess one thing we're going for here, so you've won the first few levels of the game, so to speak. So like, level 1 is, own a practice and have a suitable income at that practice. Right? You've handled that part. The next level is growing that practice. You've handled that part. You're at the level now where you get to have options, and one thing I talk about a lot is, for very driven entrepreneurial people, the pursuit of more is fun. But then there's also a consequence that occurs. There's a financial consequence of growth. There's also a stress level consequence of growth. There's also the family component, right? A lot of us who are men who are married, our wives potentially have resistance to more growth because they already see how wrapped up we are in our current obligations, and the idea of more obligations can be daunting to the family. And so like there's all of these sort of like kind of peripheral elements around a very driven entrepreneur. And one thing that I really like to talk about is I like to talk about sort of building a bubble where it's like I have this bubble where I live, and in your situation, I'm going to describe the bubble. So it's like 3 days a week, you're clinical in your flagship office, you are doing specialty care, you're getting 30% of that, and that is a fixed thing. If an associate leaves, if anything happens, the team knows Bob is not deviating from the bubble. The bubble is the 3 days a week, and they've got to figure it out. And that means that patients are going to wait. That means that hygiene is going to be overflowing. Like, there's consequences that will occur, but one of those options is not going 5 days a week clinical. It's going to be something else. So that is sort of like building boundaries around that in your procedure mix and in your days of the week that you work. And also, I think you should build a boundary around an owner draw. So, for example, if you think, okay, like an extra, $15,000 a month in an owner draw that I pay myself as just like a boundary is going to put, like, you want to put yourself in a situation where monthly cash flow coming into your personal bank account and personal life is sustainable to the point where you feel very comfortable long term and you don't have a pain point around your personal cash flow. So I guess when I kind of say all of that, do you get a little bit more clear on what type of boundaries you need to build?
Yeah, I think you outlined that perfectly. That's where I failed in the past and feel like what you described there, three days of clinical work, taking a draw from the practice as well as, a salary. If something goes wrong, which it probably will at some point in time, meaning we may lose an associate or we may lose a hygienist, then we just have to figure it out without me stepping in to handle it.
Yeah, exactly. So, do you have like there's the quantitative and qualitative. So qualitative, we're talking about days of the week working, we're talking about, your workload, all of those things. And then quantitative is your financial picture. So like what is the delta right now between what you're making and what you would need to make on a monthly basis to feel like this is not a problem and I'm very well paid for what I'm doing? Because one of your pain points is that you've invested so much into the practice and you would like to start getting that return on investment, the money coming out. So, do you have an idea of kind of like how far is your current income away from your income that feels sustainable to kind of build that boundary around growth?
It's getting closer and closer, but I think taking draws that aren't dependent on me clinically working would psychologically be really beneficial, knowing that I'm getting paid in addition to as a practice owner for all the effort and sacrifices made in the past. So, yes. And like I said, that's always been just reinvested in the practice.
Do you have one bank account that you use for the whole operation?
No, we have separate bank accounts. Oh, for the no, the 2 practices, everything goes into one.
Okay, so then do you have like what kind of other account do you have then for the business?
We have a savings account and an investment account.
So then how does your reinvestment here's what I'm getting at. I'm trying to figure out, are you just reinvesting constantly or do you let money accumulate and then you're like, okay, how do I want to invest this money? And then you put it back in.
Both. It's in the account, and, as we need it, if we're doing an expansion or we're doing an acquisition or we're buying new equipment, then, we'll purchase it out of, savings. So it'll just basically be as needed. If we have a hire we wanna make and we're gonna increase the payroll for a little bit, then we'll just basically, go ahead and do that.
Okay. And something you talked about is budgeting. You're like the budget or the goal for this expense item is this percentage and here we are at this percentage. Like how diligent are you with that?
I'm very diligent. We've worked really hard at getting our supply expenses down, our lab expenses down, marketing. You know, I feel like we have our eye on those quite a bit. Obviously, staff needs work, but I feel like that is more of a systems problem that and probably I've overbuilt a little bit, and I'm not willing to necessarily trim at this point in time. And so, as far as budgeting goes for other things like equipment and things like that, I mean, we have an idea. We plan it at the beginning of the year as far as what purchases we want to make, and build up cash reserves for that, and then make the purchase when we're ready.
Yeah. So what I'm suggesting you do is I'm suggesting you pick a number and you say for all the work I've put in, like think of let's just do percentages, right? So like cuz I think this will really highlight the point. So I want to say let's just do a hypothetical of 20 grand a month. So let's just say we allocated 20 grand a month to be the Bob's draw because Bob has done a great job to date, right? Like just the return on investment going back to your personal life where you can do whatever is appropriate. That is 3%.
Okay.
Just to kind of like throw that out there, right? So it's like if we have a business that is, you were concerned that we were at 3%, like you were concerned that we were at 7% profitability. So taking out 3% on an annual basis as a draw, that would have been half of what we thought profitability was. But we actually think profitability is like, maybe 14%. And so, 3% out is like, a fourth, for example, of your profit, right? So what I'm essentially telling you is pick a number that feels really good in terms of the dollar amount, but from a percentage basis, puts the business in a position where it will continue to accumulate cash, right? And so it's that, pay yourself first type mantra. And so I would tell you that what you need to do first and foremost before any growth, any additional growth, is you need to build yourself a bubble. And I call it a bubble, but like I'm sure there's a better term. But like I just think of like putting you in a little bubble where you're happy no matter what. And it's like I'm gonna work my 3 days. I'm gonna do the dentistry I like. I'm gonna have my income for my production, and I'm gonna have my, in this situation, I'm saying 20 grand a month payment. And like this is my bubble. These are things that will not change. It's my certainty. It's my reward for the work I've done. And the rest outside of the bubble, I play the game. I continue to invest and grow, but I kind of have like that bubble of boundary around me that is the certainty and is the reward for what I've done so far to make it so that this phase is more of coasting rather than like aggressively driving with consequences.
I love the sound of that. Yes.
So do you feel like you've kind of I've explained it enough where you feel like you can put that in place?
Yes, I do. That
Okay.
that would be very easy to put in place, and I think that would go a long way as far keeping me happy in that bubble.
Yeah. So now let's talk about the staff costs. So 36% staff. What is that? Why is that? Just you know it, right? So just kind of like for our audience, let's explain the staff costs.
Yeah, so basically I have a good team of leaders.
Hmm.
I actually have 2 leaders per department. So that means I have 2 clinical leaders, 2 hygiene leaders, 2 admin leaders, and then on top of that, I have an office manager that oversees everything, and I have a marketing person, a full-time marketing person, and I also have a full-time accountant that handles all the HR, bookkeeping, and all of that. So some of those expenses are in that management I told you about.
Yep, marketing and the HR accountant.
Yes, but
So did you say two clinical leaders, two hygiene leaders, and one office
yes,
manager?
2 admin leaders.
So okay, now, now just like for everyone that's wondering, why the redundancy at the position?
It just evolved that way, and
But like you must think it's better, right?
I think it's better in yes because they work together. They're able to help each other. Some people have strengths with handling people problems. Others are very systems driven and are good at tasks and things like that. And so putting a team together just seemed to work really well for us over the years.
Okay. So help me understand. The hygiene leaders, are they still seeing patients?
Each of the leaders will get some admin time during the week. So the hygiene leaders are seeing patients. We've deployed them probably 85, 90% back into the trenches. At certain times, we will give them more admin time if we're working through projects or we're doing a software upgrade or a changeover or something like that. So, but currently, the leaders are all in the trenches probably 85% of the time, and 15% of their time is admin, except for the office manager who's 100% out of the trenches.
And then I understand this. So now walk me through. So like you in your so it's interesting in your form that you filled out, you talked about how you have like your team was very like these leaders, right? You have 7 of them. So this leadership team of 7, they were very big in the process of bringing on that additional office and integrating it and making changes and improving it and all of that. So can you walk through like what was the work they did? What was the work you did?
So basically, what I did is I took one of my team leaders from each department and I moved them over there. And they would basically be handling the different departments. So we had hygiene, we had admin, and then we had clinical. And so they handled the integration. And what I mean by the integration is learning the new software, making sure that the existing staff is doing well, and implementing new systems or maintaining the systems that they had and just making sure it all works. Whereas my job was just to come in and do dentistry, which is pretty much what I did. So they spent a lot of time with the existing staff. I guess this is probably the biggest area where they helped me out with the existing staff to level them up.
And maybe help me understand like what was your role in the integration and the like you know how much work did it add for you to add that second practice?
I mean, clinically, quite a bit.
Really?
Yes, because I was working quite a bit in the new practice. An associate that I was gonna split the time with, but that then it didn't end up working out. So I ended up doing 4 days a week over in the new practice.
Wow.
So that was my, and then I would still do 1 day a week in the flagship practice.
Yeah. So you can see how the bubble conversation that we had was like
There weren't boundaries,
there was no
right?
bubble.
There's no bubble. So I got sucked into, so even though I wasn't doing much as far as the integration of, training the team and all this other stuff, I was basically back clinical 5 days a week.
Yeah, but don't you think you could have sent over one of your associates from the flagship across the parking lot to the other office?
Yeah, I probably at least 1 day a week.
I think that it 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 was good, right? This first experience because you know, it's you are the owner of a group that has 5 dentists. And if you're the first word out of your mouth was the clinical stress that you felt, right? Like that to me is just not necessarily the right, like that's not where your leverage is, for example, right? Like when you go to doing 8 million a year in revenue, having a group of this size, having team members, the number of team members that you have is very large. What you have is leverage. And so like you need to always make sure that your time is being used in a leveraged way. And if you had told me I was busy with the bank, I was busy getting the deal done, I was busy, leading the team and managing the integration, I would have said, okay, you're operating in within your leverage, right? You are operating through other people so that your time is multiplied by other people's time. And the fact that you went in the chair 4 days a week in the new practice, that's where your leverage got kind of killed because you did what one other person could do.
Mhm.
So then you're not operating within leverage. And that's, in my opinion, where the stress came in.
100%.
So I think that for you, like a good boundary is your 3 days a week at the flagship is your clinical output. Like outside of that, it doesn't really make sense for you to go clinical in a new office. Like that's just not where you're the most valuable or impactful.
I agree.
So now let me just kind of explain my thought process here, right? So there's a point. Explain the call center to me. So before I get into this, how many
Yes.
call center team members do you have, and where is the call center located?
So it's in another, office, condo and in the same office park.
You're taking this thing over.
Yeah, well, yeah, we have quite a few units, but it's non-clinical, so there's no patient,
Yeah.
activity over there. But there's 2 full-time call center people that get augmented with 2 part-timers, occasionally that come over from the main building. It's also where we keep HR, accounting, marketing, so it has a lot of our support services over there. Up to this point, they've been handling mostly the main building, but now we just upgraded our practice management software and we just upgraded our phone systems. So now it's going to be all on one system and they are going to be handling the calls for the new building as well.
So help me understand those two full timers and those two part timers. Are they also included in that 3%?
They are actually over in the staff percent. So,
Ah, that ding ding ding.
yes.
So we
So those
probably are like 34% staff and 5% management.
probably, yes. Those aren't as higher paid positions as the other management ones,
Yep.
but if yeah, to keep it, if you want to break that out accurately, then 2 of those salaries would go over the management.
And the three rents are all in that 2.6% facility?
Yes.
Very nice.
Yes.
Very, very nice. Well done. Well done on that. I mean, you who would have thought that you would be coming onto the show with three different leases in the same office park that combined rents between those leases is 2.6%. That is impressive. So, okay, so now my point was that there is a you really want what you really want to do is you really want to do two things. So the first thing is you need to build your bubble, right? So like that's the first thing. You need to build your bubble. You don't pierce your bubble. Your team knows your bubble. It's your bubble. That's the first thing. Then the next thing is when you feel very comfortable with that, right? Where it's like you've had this schedule, you're doing the procedures you like, you're taking home the draws, and you're like watching the cash continue to grow, even though you're taking the draws. Like, stabilize that initially while you potentially explore additional opportunities. But your criteria for additional opportunities, the doctor piece needs to be situated, right? You're not going to walk into a practice where you don't have the doctor situation figured out. Either you're going to bring in one of your doctors or you're going to have the existing doctor. Like, you're going to have a doctor solution before you walk in. But then the other thing is there's a point where this infrastructure that you have seems really great for 2 to 6 offices, somewhere in that window. Once you get past that, this infrastructure will begin to need a more robust infrastructure. And my suggestion to you would be to not go past this. So like there you kind of have this sweet spot right now where you kind of have this, I don't want to call it easier growth, but you have some like easier growth in front of you that you've already done some of the work to set up. So now you just kind of like, cuz right now your management costs, we called them 3%, I'm calling them 5%. Like you can essentially like dilute that with more locations and add a couple more to your mix, add some net worth, get some ready to grow practices, grow them. And then after that, I think that there's a real reevaluation point that probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense to continue to go.
Yes, I agree.
I feel like from my perspective, I was that clarifying?
Yes, it's very clarifying. I want to capitalize on, what I've built so far. I want to create some boundaries, create a bubble and operate within that bubble. And I think that's going to give me the sustainability that I'm looking for. And at some point, like you say, the game's gonna change, and I'm going to have to reinvent or reinvest in that infrastructure. And honestly, that's not something that at this point in my career I'm looking to do.
Yeah.
So, but I still have some runway left that I can take advantage of.
So I guess something I wanted to kind of come back to now is you talked about like doing 3 days a week. That's mostly the specialty care that you're looking for. So before we kind of close, I maybe want to check in on that one item. Like, where are you at with that? Like, what does your schedule look like nowadays? Are you? I'm assuming you're working 3 days because I saw it. But like, are you working 3 days, and are the 3 days the type of dentistry that you want them to do?
So I am working 3 days now. And as far as the type of dentistry I want to do, I have one day dedicated towards specialty procedures, and the other two are not. I'd like to flip that where I have 2 days dedicated to specialty procedures, and one I'm just seeing my patient base that wants to continue to see me.
Do you feel like there's a modification that needs to be made there?
I just have to template the schedule and block out the specialty blocks and make that happen. I think there's enough work that gets generated within the practice to fill those, so I don't think that's going to be a problem.
Okay. So then it seems like, your next steps. So then maybe let's touch on the supplies and the administrative expenses. Those are the two areas that I see that are like kind of prime for some cutting. And I do think, do you have like, like you have a full-time CPA, but do you have like a mechanism where it's like if the CPA says something's high, then you have a team that's going to kind of go and like help reduce that expenditure?
Well, we have the in-house accountant, and she keeps track of everything as far as supplies and all of that. And she's in constant communication with the clinical team leads. And the clinical team leads are in charge of ordering the supplies, and they have a budget that they're working within. And so there is a feedback loop in place as far as that goes. We've introduced some new technology as far as our ordering platform goes, and that seems to help. We're coming down from about 8% from the previous year. So I feel like we're moving in the right direction. And as I mentioned, our goal was 6%. I feel like we could get just under 6% and still be perfectly comfortable. So I think it's still a work in progress, but I think we're doing what we need to do in order to get that done.
And I think my question is, why is your goal not 5? So I feel like what I know with supplies, is like the people that are insanely good can be between 3 and 4%. The
Hmm.
really good, 4 to 5%. The like standard good is like 5% budget. 5 to 6% still okay, but like I'm just wondering like why did we set a goal of 6? To me that sounds high.
Yeah, I feel like we probably could hit 5 if we really, put forth the effort and put the principles in place that we need to, but I've never been that low, honestly. I've always hung around between 6 and 8.
And then I think the same thing on the admin side. Like the admin side, like it's what you described. You said like it's kind of a catch-all. So it's
Mhm.
like to go in there and to see what is the catch-all, may be tough. But like that's an exercise where, Bob, like you have a team now, right? So what you do is you go to your clinical leaders and your accountant and you say, "I would like you guys to work together. We can get to 5%. I'd like to explore how to do that." Same thing with administrative costs. It's like we have the goal at 6%, we're at 7%. How do we stay within goal? Right? And it's like if you put pressure on it, there's this cool thing that I saw about how like, profitability is somewhat unnatural. Like you have to be like kind of putting a lot of force downwards on the expenditures to make it happen. And I think that you have a like at a business of your size, these couple of points that you could probably shave off at least 1 percentage point on both supplies and admin. So if you say that,
Agreed.
right, you say, "Oh, well, it's 2%. Why are we even talking about 2%?" Well, we just planned an owner draw for 3%, right? So it's like you're going to get 2/3 of the owner draw paid for by just, taking some minor reductions in some other items. Like that's the kind of leverage you have now at your size of revenue is like these small percentage points, like each percentage point is 75 grand a year. So it's like, that's a pretty significant sum. So, I think that there's some opportunities there.
Agreed.
Well, Bob, that's kind of what I have for you. So I think that, kind of to recap, you came on the show and, you're at this crossroads between, not knowing what to do, not knowing about profitability and growth and not knowing what's the correct direction for you. So I guess do you maybe kind of like walk us through what's unpack your takeaways one by one and maybe walk us through some of your takeaways from that crossroads about being, do I simplify what I have or do I expand?
I feel like I was very much up in the air as far as where to go at this juncture, and I feel more clarity as far as the things that I need to do, and I see that and what those things are would be obviously putting those boundaries in place, building the bubbles, having criteria for additional opportunities, not just jumping on every opportunity that comes up, but actually having that planned out. Realize, acknowledge the fact that I do have some runway left if I wanted to acquire another practice or two, and it would probably help the bottom line and the profit and loss. And I have the team in place to do that. I just can't get sucked into what I got sucked into over the course of the last year, which sours me on continuing on the journey. So I think there's some work to do with the profit and loss as far as trimming some more expenses. And I think a big thing is just building that draw in place for me. And so it's not just totally dependent on clinically what I earn.
And I think, Bob, the thing I really want to close on is, guys like you're always looking for the growth, right? You're always looking for that next thing to accomplish, next, improvement to make. And like we've definitely given you some pointers here. But I just want to take a step back and say, like, hats off to you for all that you've done, right? I think that that's the piece that, I think that they say the top 1%. So that they say that it's the top 30% of offices do a million or more. I believe the top like 3% do 2 million or more. And so you think about where you're at in terms of the percentage of dentists who own practices, like you're in the top percentage, and even fractions of that. So I think, to kind of to not acknowledge that and congratulate you for what you've done would be, I think, a lack of perspective. And so,
Thank you, George.
Bob, I think that, you've maybe take a minute, have a glass of some of your favorite alcohol tonight, and just appreciate what you've done, and then tomorrow kind of go back to the pursuit of more. But also stop and realize that you're in a place that not many people get to.
Thank you very much, George.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on Practice Underwater. And our audience, if you guys want to join the show, team@sharedpractices.com is the best place to go. So go to team@sharedpractices.com, shoot them an email, and we'll get you on the show. Thanks for listening to another episode of Practice Underwater.